Fire Tribe, where you at?
I hope you're ready. Rising from the ashes and it's getting heavy. Conspiracies, we got plenty and some are scary. From aliens to Bigfoot, extraordinary. Yeah. Dan Unaki Dan and the homie Romy. I was bugging out all the crazy things he showed me. Jesus bloodlines to the stars in the skies. Always a good time vibing with the Fire Tribe. Hey, so wake up, get it cracking. Rise out the ashes, I know you got a passion. Kick off the convo with theories, many conspiracies, other dimensions, plenty ancient history. Fire Tribe, where you at? Wake up. We about to get into it. I know you can't get enough. At home, at work, it don't matter. Turn it up. Rising from the ashes. You know what's up. Hey. Rising from the ashes.
Immanuel Kingman. Immanuel Kingman.
These UFOs, quote unquote UFOs that we say, they could be fallen angels, because that's exactly what they're wheels within wheels. Highly energetic for the earth. Highly energetic. The word daemon, like you said, that's also a Greek term that means background information. So when we're hundreds or even thousands of years down the line, it's important that we do give everyone and everything that's written down its full respect and take it as literal, if that's what the author is meaning it as. But a lot of times these ancient works, they aren't written down as metaphorical things to be a mystery school thing.
A mystery school thing. Because they migrated back because they were the daemons, so they were in the background, but not necessarily in the foreground.
And once Rome was destroyed in 476 AD, that's when I think approximately 500 AD is when the millennial reign started. Judaism, to me, is religion. Religion is tradition. But when we talk about the Hebrew people, they were the line of God. They were directly created by God, whereas there were other creations already on earth that were not created by God. That there were, like when Cain is afraid that he's going to be killed when he's cast out of the garden, and then all of a sudden he has a wife, but it's only supposed to be him. He killed Abel and Adam and Eve. You know, obviously there's other things already here. So they were creations that were created prior to, and it's called gap theory in Christian circles, that there were already creations here.
You're listening to Rising from the Ashes.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Rising from the Ashes. I'm Dan Unaki Dan. The homie is I don't know where the fuck he is. Now, he had to work this morning. He got back from Florida a couple weeks ago, or about a week ago. Then he got sick with some type of poisoning, or he just had probably some jet lag, so he was incapacitated for a couple days, and then he had to take some time off work, and then his work wanted him to work. So he got stuck working this morning. So he's going to be MIA, but it's all good because you still got me. And we also got Immanuel Kingman
What
from the
up?
Goodness Over Darkness podcast. How you doing, Immanuel?
I'm doing well. Shout out to Romy. Hope he's doing better.
Yeah. He's just been he had to go work because he's been incapacitated for the last couple days. So, and he's been supposed to have been working, and he was on vacation also. So he's working, but it's all good. So today we're going to get into the Millennial Kingdom of Christ in America, and we have Immanuel Kingman here today to help us through that and explain some things. So would you like to start, Immanuel?
Well, so I'll ask you where you would like to start, because you're pretty into Tartaria, and I mean, there's so much information that we could go off of. I have the 8-part series. If anyone listening to this wants to really dive deep into it, I have an 8-part series that covers many different aspects of it. So I've been on a few different podcasts, and I like to go off of what the host already knows rather than just start from a blind spot, because we could spend an hour and a half on talking about just scripture of what the Millennial Kingdom was, or we could talk about the evidence of this old world civilization that has been there. So what part do you want to tackle first?
Yeah, I want to know the basis for the Millennial Kingdom. Like, when does this Millennial Kingdom start and why?
Okay, so in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, it talks about, there's going to be a time of peace where Christ would reign all throughout the Bible, Old Testament as well as Revelation. So in Revelation specifically, it talks about 6 times, it mentions that there's going to be a 1,000-year period of peace where Christ reigns over earth, and Satan, or the adversary, would be bound into the pit. So when that happens, according to the biblical timeline, it would be after Christ arrived as a human, which would be Jesus, right? So it would happen approximately 500 years after that. There's this 5,500-year prophecy where Jesus would arrive, which he then does from Adam. Then there's the 6,000-year prophecy is from approximately like 6,000 to 7,000, or I'm sorry, from 5,500 to 6,500 would be like this 1,000-year period of peace. And then after 7,000 years, all of material creation dissolves and by destruction of fire, apparently. So,
so when I think of like the millennial reign of Christ, I think that he's supposed to come back. He was crucified, he died, and now he's supposed to come back and rebuild the temple, and then that's going to be the millennial reign. So how does it differ from this idea and from the idea that it already happened?
Well, so that doesn't differ, because he did come back, and it's actually historians in 66 AD report, and there's 4 different historians that report these different things, and none of them are Christians. These are all Romans or Jews. We're talking Josephus, we're talking Tacitus, and there's 2 others. I forget their names at the moment, but they report that in the skies that there were armies of heavenly beings surrounding cities, and that the 3rd temple was destroyed in 66 AD. There's a lot of different things that talk about, but that Jesus returned then, and that the New Testament was written very quickly, whereas the Old Testament, there's hundreds, thousands of years, and these prophets are living for a long time, even like through all the different aspects of it. They're not as immediate as the New Testament. The New Testament's 29 books, which are 14 of them are written by Paul, who he died right around 65 AD, I believe it was. He was martyred. But it's all like within this small time frame that the New Testament really comes from. So there was some kind of immediacy that they needed to get this information out quickly.
Okay.
So yeah, it doesn't differ from what you were saying, but most people just don't know that about these historians that they record that Jesus and the 10,000, the army of 10,000 came back and surrounded these cities and took out the principalities.
So so yeah, like I was saying, I thought when he came back, he was supposed to rebuild Jerusalem.
Right. So
did Jerusalem get rebuilt?
So when we talk about Jerusalem, we don't know where, like, we have modern day Jerusalem. That's not what Jerusalem, that was just created with 70 some years ago, right? That was what, 49 or whatever that was created. So we don't know where Jerusalem actually was, but when we look at all this Tartaria, all world architecture that we always get into, the beauty, the magnificence of these cathedrals and star forts and all that. Well, if we're talking about Israel or Jerusalem, could be possibly the entire world, because it is God's creation, or the world as we know it anyway, the earth as we know it, then we could see that, yeah, it was rebuilt and that there was this perfect creation that was going on everywhere with all this possible free energy and all that stuff that goes with that. So that's what I believe, was the 1,000 years and how we could even get to that.
Okay. So do you think the New Jerusalem is in America?
See, that's a tough thing to discuss because there's so many possibilities. And I think that the way life really works is that there's a fractal nature, that everything is repeating itself on smaller and larger scales. So I believe that there's probably a Jerusalem all over the place, that, there's one specific land that it starts at. And for the fractal nature, for myself and my healing and things that I've been through, it starts with me and then it spirals out from there. And I start helping my immediate family. Then it's, my friends, coworkers, and then it's starting a podcast and so on and so forth. It spirals outward. So I think that there would be a Jerusalem all over the earth, but I think the whole world or the whole earth that we know is Jerusalem, essentially, that it's the entirety of everything is Jerusalem.
Okay. So the first year of the millennial reign is 66.
So this is where we get, it's very iffy, the years, but yeah. So according to the mainstream narrative,
in our current mainstream. Okay.
Right. It would be approximately 66 to 73 AD may have been the 7-year tribulation. This may have been that time where all of the disciples were being killed and crucified and upside down, beheaded, all the different ways that they were all martyred. Paul, he wasn't even a disciple, but he was still martyred. All of them except for John of Patmos, who is the Epistle John, who wrote the Gospel of John, who's not John the Baptist, two different Johns, but John, who wrote the book of Revelation, wrote the Gospel of John. He says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. Or I'm sorry, I said the last part backwards. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. And that word is actually Logos, which is referring to Jesus Christ. So he wrote the book of Revelation. We're told that came out in 96 AD, that he was banned to the island of Patmos. But we don't know that to be true. That's just what the story is being told. But at the very end of the book of John, Peter overhears Jesus talking to John and says something about what's going on. Well, Jesus is saying to John that something to the effect of, you're going to live until I come back. And Peter says something. Jesus turns to Peter and goes, what's it to you if I want this disciple to live until I come back? John is the disciple whom Jesus loved. That's referred to in the Bible several times. So he says it twice, like, what's it to you if I want him to stay alive until I return? And according to the mainstream narrative, if he's the last one living in the island of Patmos, 96 AD, well, then he would have been the last one alive when Jesus returned in 70 AD or so. So there's little things like that really are curious, but the timeline, that is the hardest part, because I don't believe at all that we're in 2022. there's many different reasons, and there's things that we can get into. But as far as the 1,000-year period, I'm not sure that actually started at 70 AD. I think it was kind of a winding down, that Satan was being bound into the pit when this all started happening. And then you have Constantine in 313 AD, all of a sudden flips from paganism to what we know as Catholicism. But there's also this thing where there was these principalities, which are the watchers that have reign over certain parts of the earth. I think there were 70 specifically principalities that had reign over the 70 different nations, that some of them were corrupted. Well, they had to be then switched out. So when we talk about Catholicism or Christianity has they're equals to these pagans that, Peter and Paul are just filling in for this person and that person. Well, it was new principalities were put in place. So the old ones were bound up in 66 AD, and the new ones then took their stand. And so it was like new management, we're taking out the corrupted principalities and we're putting in new ones. So when Constantine is visited by Jesus in 313 and then switches everything, well, that's for a reason. And we, as conspiracy theorists or people of today with our modern day thinking, we're like, oh, they just took that person and put it here. But it's actually, no, there was an actual energy, an energetic being that had dominion over this place, and God switched them out. So then Constantine switched them out. And what we have now is this version of understanding that's maybe not exactly what was going on at that time. But I think it was, to answer your question in a long-winded sense, I think it was a period of time before the 1,000 years. I think it was called the church age in the Bible, that people were preaching the word of Christ, going all around the world, preaching the word of Christ for a few hundred years or so prior to the destruction of Rome. And once Rome was destroyed in 476 AD, that's when I think approximately 500 AD is when the millennial reign started. But I don't know that that was the actual years. I think that things have been spread out. So all of this could have been happening in 66 AD. It could have all been happening 313. I don't know exactly when, but these timeline events are very hard to place according to, the victors who write the history.
So the ending of this millennial reign has already happened, or because of the missing time, we are still in the millennial reign?
No, it has already happened, and it's ended. What we're in now is Satan's short season. Okay. Say that 3 times fast. It's a tongue twister. But in Revelation 20, which people don't know this, typically Christians, they're not taught this in their churches, is that there's a period in between the Millennial Kingdom and the eternal state. And it's this period where Satan is loosed from the pit for a little season, a short season. It's how it's worded in different translations. And that he would deceive the nations, and he would gather Gog and Magog from the 4 corners of the earth. And the number of people on earth would be like the sand on the shore. And he would gather them all for battle. And that would lead to the final great white throne judgment. So there's this period of time. So my idea is that what we know as the 1800s, that was the end of the millennial reign and transitioning into Satan's short season, which we are now in, and which is, I believe, coming to an end. And it's going to lead to the great white throne judgment and the eternal state.
Excellent. Yeah, I was just contemplating in my head some things, and then I lost my question. But all right, so this millennial reign is going on from around 700 or 800, and then it goes to the Tartaria age of about 800, and then this is the destruction of Tartaria when the Millennial Kingdom ends. So you think that the Tartarians were the Millennial Kingdom.
Yeah, so the word Tartaria, and it's tricky, and I'm not saying that the people that we know as Tartars today are this. Everything obviously gets perverted, and these symbols get used for different things. They take the Hindu symbol of peace and turn it to the Nazi symbol, so that people don't look at it. There's all sorts of weird stuff that happens with that. So the word Tartaria, if we break that down, in Greek, Tartarus means the abyss. It's a special place in hell, as we know as hell, Sheol, if you will, that there's a special place called Tartarus. So when we talk about Tartaria, that's really close to Tartarus. Well, if you look at what the suffix ia in Greek means, it means belonging to, one of the definitions, there's several, but one of the definitions is belonging to a state of or a condition of. So when you break down Tartaria, it could be a state of Tartar, a condition of Tartar, belonging to Tartar. And what is Tartar? But it's Tartarus. And then we have so many derogatory names for the Tartarians, like barbarians is something that we say. You call someone a retard. There's so many different things that point to the Tartarians were not well-liked people. And if it was this beautiful civilization with free energy and all, that wouldn't be part of our language. The common language of the world is English. And what would have been the elite language would have been Latin. And Latin and English are very similar. There's a lot of things. You just switch out minor differences, F's and S's, U's and V's. There's little subtleties that you can read Latin and not know Latin itself if you just know the little subtleties. And I'm not saying that it works in every single case, but Latin and English are much more closely related than the offsprings of Latin, which are French, Spanish, Italian. They're much further away from English than Latin is itself. So I think that there was a one world language for the common people, which was English, and a one world language for the elites, which would have been Latin, and that it was kept that way so that the common people couldn't understand, but the elite people could understand everything. So Tartaria, we wouldn't have all of these derogatory names for Tartars unless they were something that was affecting the peaceful, loving civilization that we talk about in this conspiracy theory of Tartaria. And then there's like little weird things that you've recognized of psyops when you start to see that the CIA released a document saying that the communists wanted to cover up this land known as Tartaria, that they wanted to rid the world of it, but they still left it on all these different maps, globes, still printed into after this time period that they talk about, what this document came out in like the late 50s, and there's still maps that are being produced, globes being produced afterwards that have Tartaria on it. So if they really wanted to cover it up, they didn't do a very good job of it. They could have done much better. It's in all these different books. It's actually in so many different things when you look at from like the 1920s. There's different YouTube channels you can get into that talk about the Tartarians in all these different places. And there's actually still mainstream people who are called Tartars. So I don't think that it would have been Tartaria. I think Tartaria, or the Tartarians, were those who were freed from the pits, the adversaries that were freed from the pit, who came from Tartarus and made their kingdom. They took over, starting in this certain area, which may have actually been Jerusalem. When you start to look at different things, it's very weird, but Russia could have different spots in it that are the actual biblical terms of Jerusalem, like we were talking about earlier. St. Petersburg, the St. Peter's Gates. There's just so many different weird things that go on with that. But when we talk about Tartaria, I think that is the psyop to get us looking at wanting Tartaria to be this one world government again, rather than it being the Millennial Kingdom where people were free to do as they wanted and they were living amongst each other in a peaceful way.
So this is kind of one of the things that I go back and forth on, because I can see both sides of the idea. I can see Tartaria as being the bad guys, or the theoretical bad guys that built these buildings in America, and then the church is the one that comes, and the Catholic Church is the one that comes and wipes them out and repurposes their buildings. And the Tartarians therefore become the evil ones. But then there's a perspective that the Tartarians are the actual Millennial Kingdom, or the Israelites. And then this actually coincides for me in the fact that a lot of these the 10 northern kingdoms of Israel become like the lands of Tartaria in the Middle East, of between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea and out to the steppes of Russia. You have this whole area there that describes like the Scythians, the tribe of Dan. The tribe of the Scythians go back to Isaac. They're related to him. And that line, and I think Isaac isn't Isaac's line the line that's supposed to have the bring about the next. They're supposed to have the kingship, right?
I'm not sure on that. I know Isaac was Abraham's son, who he was offered up and was, about to cut him in half, and then his sword was changed into flowers or something.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm not sure more on Isaac. I'm not too studied into the Old Testament stuff.
Yeah, so I go to that perspective also, of all these different Tartaria kingdoms being part of the Israelites. And then I go, well, then, and because even the Tuatha De Danann, the story that we get of that is the tribe of Dan. They started calling them the daemons, and the day was God. So they were just the God men, the men of God. So when you think of it in that perspective of like the God men or the men of God are the Tartarians, and they're going around and bringing enlightenment to people, then you could
like
really
the
see
sons of God, like the fallen angels, the sons of God, something like that.
Yeah, they're the day men, the God men. So the whole Tartaria situation over there relates to the tribe of Israel and the descendants of Noah, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that very well could be. I mean, there's so many different aspects, and the reason why I really think that we're in the Satan's short season is because it's the time of deception, that there's information that can lead you to believe any number of things, and there's a lot of evidence for it all, which makes everything really confusing, because you can go down any number of tracks. You have certain aspects of thinking. Our friend Andy, he has certain aspects of thinking. I have certain aspects of thinking. Anybody does. We can all see that. Okay, I understand why they would think that. We can see each other's points of view and really see that there's a lot of evidence they're not just believing things on a whim, that there is things that lead us to that. And I think that when we have the understanding of the Bible as the history book of humanity, whereas the Sumerian story, the Egyptian story, the Greek story, the Roman story, that these are from the perspectives of those who worshipped these fallen beings, and that these are the creations of the fallen beings. Well, then it's different when we look at the Bible is from the human perspective of what was going on, because we think that the Egyptian, Greek, and Roman, Sumerian, that these are all different time periods, but it's actually one time period. When the fallen fell, they came to all these different places, and they all have similar responsibilities and duties. They were principalities that are reigning over certain areas. And when we really understand the human perspective that is the Bible, the Hebrew people, God's creation, Adam and Eve, and all the lines that extend from Seth, well, then you can start to understand why this book is very similar to all these other mythologies, but it's a different perspective. It's a different take on what was going on, because these are the people who were always loyal to God, that this certain line, and there's only certain people mentioned. Like, I'm reading Genesis this morning, and they only mention, I think it was like Genesis 5 or 6, that they talk about the different sons, the lines from Adam, from Seth, and it goes all the way down. They only mention the name of one of the sons, and they say this person also had more sons and daughters. But those other sons and daughters weren't loyal to God the way that these people were. So there's so many different things, because the word daemon, like you said, that's also a Greek term that means background information, that it's neither good nor bad. It's moving in the background. It's in your subconscious, that there's things moving there that can be both good and bad. And when you look at computers, you have the term daemon again. It's the same type of idea.
Well, it makes sense, because they're migrating from one location to another.
Okay. Well, yeah, that they're just moving in the background. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And that's how consciousness works. So, like, our subconscious is always operating, creating what we're seeing in front of us to a degree. And things are just there, and they're the daemons of our life. But when you clear out those things, and you are very clear in your understandings, because you have a perspective of what humanity has been through, and you have an understanding of what you yourself have been through, and you heal all your traumas, and why do I do the things I do, and you clear out that background information, these background programs, you start ending tasks. You pull up Control-Alt-Delete in your subconscious, and you start deleting all those things. Well, then you aren't running on confusion, because your operating power is magnified, and your closeness to God is there, with an understanding of who you are and where you are in time and in consciousness.
Do you know what son it is that Jesus comes from of Noah? Which line? Well, like, what line does David belong to? Is it Cain, or is it
no,
Seth?
not Cain.
It's Seth?
Yes, it would definitely be Seth. Yeah.
Okay.
So, but Cain and Seth are children of Adam, not Noah. Noah's 3 sons are Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
Yeah.
So I don't know which one that David comes from. I think David would have been, I don't know. I was going to say, I think David was before Noah. I'm not, I don't know that, but I don't know which line that Jesus would extend from out of Noah.
Yeah, because I thought it was Seth.
Well, yeah, Seth is Adam's son. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because usually Cain is seen as the evil one and the murderer.
Yeah,
and that's
he's the one that killed Abel.
Yeah, that's like the bad one. But what's interesting to me is, like, in Egypt, Seth is the bad one.
Well, yeah, see, it's that perspective, right?
Yeah,
because
so
they were
like,
from the evil one. They're from Cain. So they would think that Seth is evil, because it's, because God kept Seth around. Adam kept Seth around, whereas Cain was the murderer who was then cast out. And so they're worshiping their God, who's Cain, who brought them the knowledge, who was their enlightener. He was freeing these people's minds, these creations that were enslaved here by other entities, that Cain taught them things directly from, quote unquote, God, which was Adam, the first man. So he had all the knowledge of God. He was God in the flesh, essentially, before God came back in the flesh, the second Adam, as Christ is referred as.
Yes. I just get really confused on all these things. But so then the Set in Egypt would have been killing Osiris, because Osiris is the bad guy from the line of Cain, and he would want to be trying to stop that from happening, so that way good could rule. So that means Osiris is bad, if we try to put it into context of good and bad, because that's always kind of tricky too, because like we were talking about earlier, sometimes people do good things and bad things and you can't throw it all out. So
Right.
it's
Yeah,
just go ahead.
I'm sorry. But when you start to understand that all these fallen, they all have one agenda to go against God, and that the Bible is from God. So the Bible, will say, is this centralized thing, and then surrounding it on the outer ring of that is everyone else's perspective attacking the Bible. And that's why it gets confusing as to what perspective. So, yeah, like you said, good and bad, it's hard to understand because that is a perspective thing. But when you start to understand whose perspective, so we're talking about the Bible is the creation of God, Adam and Eve's line all the way down, that is the Bible. And then all the other quote unquote mythologies, are all the other perspectives from the fallen and their creations and the people who worshiped them versus the people who were worshiping God. That's why it's so confusing, and that's why we can fall in line of believing that the Norse mythology is the correct one, the Sumerian's the correct one, the Egyptian is the correct one, and people just pick and choose which one. But it's all deception. It's all not necessarily deception, but it's all the adversary that is getting you to not worship actual God. It's getting you to worship these beings who don't want you to worship God. The adversary, Satan, is the adversary of who? It's the adversary of Christ. It's the adversary of you. It's the Satanists that run this realm, the Luciferians that believe that they are God themselves, that they are gods amongst men, whereas God is invisible.
Isn't that like the Jews then?
What was that?
Isn't that like the Jews?
What you talking about, the Pharisees, or
they think they're the gods, they're the chosen people.
People.
They're the ones that are above everybody else.
Well, so there is, when we talk about the Hebrew people, Judaism to me is a religion. Religion is tradition. But when we talk about the Hebrew people, they were the line of God. They were directly created by God, whereas there were other creations already on earth that were not created by God. That there were, like when Cain is afraid that he's going to be killed when he's cast out of the garden, and then all of a sudden he has a wife, but it's only supposed to be him. He killed Abel and Adam and Eve. Obviously there's other things already here. So they were creations that were created prior to, and it's called gap theory in Christian circles, that there were already creations here, and Cain being cast out, that's where he was this enlightened, he was bringing enlightenment to different people. And Adam Stokes, when I had him on, he was telling me about Cain there's different groups, the Cainites, not the Canaanites, similar but different. But there's Cainites who worshipped Cain, and that Cain and the serpent became best friends, essentially. And there's a lot of different stuff that goes on with that.
Well, God and Satan were tight, though, weren't they, bros?
So Lucifer, when they talk
in the
about
book of Job, they're hanging out together and fucking inflicting Job with all kinds of stuff to see if he'll keep his faith. And they're sitting there like kind of laughing about it, saying like, let's see what it'll do if we'll give him this and give him that.
Right.
And trying to tempt God. And then what he does is he tricks God into fucking giving Job all these afflictions.
Well,
just to test his faith.
Yeah, he was testing Job's faith, right? So what in this council, there's this council, and Dr. Michael Heiser, I'm not too studied on his work, but he breaks it down. He knows the Greek, the Hebrew, and the English, and he breaks down that there's this council, I think of 9, that God has in heaven, and that there's also an evil side to that. They create their own council, but in this council of 9, in order to strengthen everyone's resolve, these 9 different people or beings, whatever, they have their own duties and responsibilities, and one of them is to be the adversary. It's to try to lure people away from God. So when we talk about Satan, it's not talking about the adversary, and you've had Esoteric Eddie on. When we talk about Satan, Lucifer, maybe they're not the same character. A lot of times it's just said as the adversary. You could call Hillary Clinton Satan, you could call Trump Satan, and you're not wrong. They're the adversary of humanity. That's what it boils down to. So there are many different Satans and gods. So when we talk about Lucifer, though, that is a mistranslation. It's supposed to be something else, but it comes from probably Samael was this creation, this angel, if you will, that was God's closest angel who wanted to then be worshipped. So then he rebelled and he brought fallen angels with him. So there's created many Satans as they all fell and they started teaming together, but they're a family who's feuding, who they all want control, but their ultimate goal is just to keep God away from the people. So it doesn't really matter if it's Trump's family or if it's the Clinton family or the Bush family. It doesn't really matter, just as long as it's not God's family. That's what matters to them more than anything. So they feud and they try to get to the top, but in the end, they're working together against us, and they're just like jockeying for position on the leaderboard.
Yeah. It's crazy, man. And so everything's so messed up.
Yeah.
Satan's short season. If you just take the first letter of each of that, it's
yeah,
like the serpent.
Yeah. Yeah, the SS, hey, the Hitler.
SSS.
The SS.
It's 3S.
Yeah, it's Satan's season.
Yeah, Satan's short seasons.
Yeah.
The snake in the grass. And the tribe of Dan is the snake.
Yeah,
and,
that's interesting.
So, and I think it's prophesied in the Bible too that the tribe of Dan will be the Antichrist in the end times. So that's interesting too.
I haven't come across the tribe of Dan in the Bible.
You haven't?
Mm-mm. I'm still I'm working my way through the Old Testament now, but yeah, he's not one of the 12 tribes of Israel.
It was one of the 13.
Well, it's not mentioned.
The tribe of Dan gets kicked out because they go mingle with the Canaanites and they start worshiping other deities besides God.
Okay,
and so they kick them out of the tribes of Israel. Then they go into the Northlands and then into that area.
I'll have to get into that. I guess that's Old Testament stuff, because then what I was just talking about is the New Testament one, the 12 tribes.
And then that connects in with the Tuatha De Danann, and then how they kind of went back and went up to the north into Denmark and then into Ireland and Scotland and stuff.
Right.
Because they migrated back because they were the daemons, so they were in the background, but not necessarily in the foreground.
Oh, okay. So maybe like Judas was represented by, the 12 disciples. The Judas, the betrayer, the one
Scorpion.
who went against God. Yeah.
Kiss of death.
Yeah.
Let's get back more into America and Tartaria, because when you talk about the Millennial Kingdom on your 8-part series, one of the things that you kind of talk about is these catastrophes that happen in America, these volcanic things and earthquakes and whatnot. Can you like go into some of those and show how that affected the land? And is that part of the Millennial Kingdom? Is that a significant? How does that fit into that?
Yeah, so I think that is the ending of how the Millennial Kingdom was destroyed and essentially covered up, is that it was destroyed. And it's not just America that some of the events are going on. I mean, it's all over.
Worldwide.
Yeah. So I think, I'll say where I think that it started. And when I talked about the biblical apocalypse in that 2-part series that I had, which is also a playlist on my YouTube channel, I start with Immanuel Swedenborg when he starts prophesying. He becomes super psychic all of a sudden. Jesus Christ comes to him on Easter weekend, and he goes from being this atheistic scientist to then he is completely psychic, seeing the unseen realm, angels and demons traveling, and just heaven and hell. He has books on it. Very interesting stuff. Well, he said that the end of the world was happening. And that was in like that's been a little while for me, but I think that was like 1759 or so. He said that. So when we talk about 1776, right, is the formation of the United States of America. And we have the Declaration of Independence.
And the Illuminati.
Yes, the Bavarian Illuminati. 1776, and also it was 1773 was who was it? The Jesuits were expelled or disbanded. Something was it the Jesuits or Knights of Templar
in America?
I'm not sure exactly where it was.
I think they. I'm not sure.
No, well, I think they all came to America for quote unquote religious freedom.
Templars were disbanded in like 1307 or something like that. Yeah, 1300s. Yeah.
Friday the 13th. Yeah, October 13th, 1307.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it was the Jesuits. But yeah, when they started America, that was because it was freedom. They wanted freedom from religious persecution, as they call it. That's all nonsense. That was because they were practicing child sacrifice and all sorts of Old Testament rituals that they were being cast out of Europe for that. They were being expelled from everywhere. So they're like, oh, let's go to where nobody's at. Even though there were people here, there weren't very many tribes here at that time, because something was happening where the giants just started dying off for whatever reason. Things were going on that there was these cities just left bare, and America itself, what we know as America, North America, it was really just not populated to a great degree. It wasn't as empty as we're led to believe, that there were just Native American tribes running around in grass skirts, living, hunting buffalo until they killed them off and all that stuff. That's really a false representation of what was going on in America, but it wasn't populated the way it is now with 330 plus million Americans. So when we talk about, Declaration of Independence starts America, well, what really started America was the Constitution of the United States. And that was written in 1788. It didn't go into effect until March 3rd, 1789. So it was written in 87 and completed in 88 and went to effect in 89. Well, there's this prophecy, I think it's in Jeremiah. I forget exactly where it's at in the Old Testament, but there's this prophecy that Babylon would reign for 70 years and 5 months in the Old Testament. And 70 years and 5 months after March 3rd, 1789, we have the Carrington event, which was September 1st and 2nd, 1859, which that is what I believe was the rapture. So in that 70-year period of time, there were many destructive cataclysms, catastrophes, everything that Jesus spoke about, what would happen at the end times, all were occurring there. So obviously we had wars going on in the 1770s in America, but that was just like the very beginnings of it. Where we can really focus on is the 1800s. In 1811, what started occurring, the New Madrid earthquakes, which oddly enough, New Madrid is in Missouri. The Mormons believe that Jackson, Missouri was the Garden of Eden, which is kind of like the central point of America. Not exactly, but generally speaking, it's in that area. And it's right on the Mississippi River. Well, the New Madrid earthquakes, 3 of them struck from December 1811 until early February 1812. And it reversed the Mississippi River for 3 days, created 2 new waterfalls, so many different weird things. And that sounds like a biblical event to me. If we're talking about the Mississippi River was reversed, and it's where the Mormons believe that Eden was, or in that general area anyway. I mean, that is sounds very biblical. So you had that happen. You had Tecumseh's or Napoleon's comet that was seen worldwide for 17 months. It was visible with the naked eye for like 260 some odd days or whatever. This comet that was just circling the earth and people could just see it. It wasn't very far away. It was called Tecumseh's or Napoleon's comet, depending if you were in Europe or North America, because what we also had going on in 1812 was World War Zero, or the Napoleonic Wars, as it's more commonly known as, because they don't tell us it's a world war. We have the War of 1812 in America, which is the French and some Native Americans against the English and other Native Americans, as well as Napoleon taking over all of Europe and into Russia. And there's big battles going on where the French are just dominating the entire world at that time. Then that leads into 1814. There's a volcanic eruption. I forget which one it was, but there was a volcanic eruption that occurred. Then in 1815, Mount Tambora explodes. And 1816 is then the year without a summer. And this Napoleonic War was going on from, well, it really started in 1801, but it really hyped up between 1812 and 1815. So in this short time frame, we have Jesus's words being fulfilled, that there would be wars, rumors of war, there would be pestilence, there would be famine, because there was famine all over the place because of the wars, because of the volcanic explosion. What happened the year without a summer, the sun was blocked out for an entire year, and it was up to about 7 years where it was really blocked out. But he also said that the sun wouldn't be seen, it would be blackened, and the moon wouldn't be visible at all, which that is exactly what would have occurred. So he also said that the stars would fall from heaven. And in 1833, you have the Leonids meteor shower, where over 100,000 comets just started appearing like they were falling from heaven. Then what we have in the 1840s to 1860s, we have photographs of the entire world where all these major cities are completely empty, as if everybody went underground for some reason, maybe because comets were falling to the earth and striking at different places, causing mud floods, maybe causing destruction by fire, as it was foretold was going to happen. And then we look at when the World's Fair started. It was 1850, right? And all this is leading into the Carrington event. So there's all these different things happening, and then the Carrington event strikes in 1859, and that's what I believe was the rapture event. And that's when I believe Satan was finally loosed. Like, I believe that there were people who were worshiping these spirits who then were trying to bring them to fruition this entire time. And that's when it was the saints, as depicted in Catholicism, were raptured away. All the loving people who could make it into heaven, they were all gone. And then what was left were those who didn't accept Christ yet into their hearts and understanding and into their minds, and they were still living for themselves in the flesh. And that's when those who remembered it and saw these events occurring, they were thrown into insane asylums. That's when the insane asylums started. And they started experimenting on people, and they started taking people's kids and giving them to the orphan trains, and they started the infantoriums because they needed to take these newborn babies away from these insane people who were talking about the raptures occurred. You got to worship Jesus, and we got to repent and all that stuff. So they took them and called them crazy, and they paint this picture to us that the 1850s were horse and buggy drawn, that there were people were just working hard, and that they weren't very technologically advanced, and that there was nothing going on, that, you know, there was cavemen not too long ago, and, you know, just all this nonsense to really get us not focused on the destruction that happened in the 1800s that was all predicted by Jesus, and all of his words came to fruition in a very timely fashion, prophesied by Jeremiah in the Old Testament of that 70 years, 5 months that Babylon would have reign until God stepped in.
What exactly is the Carrington event?
So the Carrington event was this event where it's some kind of solar flare struck the Earth and knocked its magnetic protective layer and the magnetic field. It knocked it down by 25% immediately. And people who were working the telegraph system at the time were actually shocked, literally, like they were holding the metal or whatever. They were all felt.
Would that bring about a flood of some sort?
Well, it certainly could have done numerous things. I don't know all the details of everything that happened. I have to do some further studying into the Carrington event to help advance my position and understanding that it was the rapture. But it definitely messed up the Earth's atmosphere. And so when we talk about the free energy that these cathedrals had, like energetic fields running along them, that these star forts had energetic fields, this Tesla type of energy that you could just essentially pull it from the ether by setting things up in a certain way. I think the Carrington event really stopped all that it turned that type of energy off to where now we have to manipulate it in a different way to have it the way that we have it now.
All right. I'm going to go a little bit off script here and ask you, like, what is your kind of view on like ghosts and demons and spirits? Like, what is that? Because like seemingly if we have these demons coming from the pit and then this Carrington event happening and everything getting wiped out and destroyed, do you think like maybe the spirits of these evil people that came from the pit are now loose on the earth, and that's why we're dealing with this kind of like spiritual warfare? Or have they always kind of just been around since way back in time?
So, okay, so there's different things. Spirits, ghosts, and demons are all
Right.
three different things.
Right, exactly.
So the demons are the spirits of the Nephilim that don't have a place to go. So the Nephilim were the children of the fallen. When the fallen mixed with humanity, they created a new breed of being called the Nephilim. And they looked that some were giants, some were, there's all sorts of different stuff. Some are these Egyptian gods with bird heads, or with dog heads and human bodies. You know, there's all sorts of different cryptids that are Nephilim. And there's even smaller ones, like the small grays and stuff. They could essentially be offspring, which L.A. Marzulli actually has a skull of one, very fascinating. It's a tiny skull, so not all of them were giants. And when you talk to Ken Ami, he'll tell you that the word giant didn't mean a person of tall stature when it was translated into English. It meant someone who was earthborn or earthbound. So they are earthbound because they don't have the spirit of God in them. So they don't have heaven to go to when they die. So when the flood killed their human bodies, their energetic presence still remained, and people could still get in touch with them through psychedelics and through technologies that we have today. We don't think of them as interdimensional devices, but we're manipulating time and space to be in front of each other right now. You know, you're on the West Coast, I'm on the East Coast, very far away. We couldn't communicate right now without these interdimensional devices. But this is exactly how they get through to us, through psychedelics and through technology, is how they communicate.
Electricity?
Yes. The false electricity that we use, it's no longer the free energetic ether that we could just tap into. It's specifically being pointed towards certain things so that these beings can manipulate.
Do you think that could relate to aliens and people's like interpretation of what they're seeing is these electrical type entities that are flowing through different electrical hotspots and whatnot?
Absolutely.
And coming up as like what's the word, like showing themselves
through
in
these
some type of
energetic grids.
Yeah.
Yeah, like sometimes they'll step in a place that it's very highly energetic for the earth, and then you see them, and then they're gone. And it's Bigfoot often with many
Yeah,
cryptids.
I didn't even think about Bigfoot before. There's a lot of different, go back and forth between interdimensional Bigfoot and physical Bigfoot.
Right,
That's interesting, and because they're usually followed by some type of UFO sighting,
right.
also, which is, so if they were like to show themselves as a figure from this electrical stuff, you could also see like the UFO possibly being the portal, the electrical portal they came through, or something like that.
Right. And the Ophanim, which are angels in the Bible, they're the wheels within wheels, Ezekiel's wheel.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that they could be the fallen, these UFOs, quote unquote UFOs that we say, they could be fallen angels, because that's exactly what they're wheels within wheels, and they were angels. So that could be part of it. But yeah, so the demons, they are those Nephilim spirits that they don't have anywhere to go. It's essentially like if our computer was to be sentient all of a sudden, and we killed it. We had to, we were hand-to-hand combat.
Negative energy from the electrical grid.
Right. It would have nowhere to go. It would just be there. So people were then able to tap into that demonic energy to bring it to life, and they would create these statues that then these spirits could then possess, and the spirits could be, or biological mannequins they also would make. That's why they make clones nowadays still, is to really allow these entities that aren't of earth or aren't human to then walk amongst humans. And it's very obvious sometimes that these things aren't human, that there's something wrong. You talk about like the Men in Black phenomena and the black-eyed kids, all types of stuff like that. Like there's a bunch of weird stuff with them. So ghosts, in my opinion, are earthbound spirits. And I've communicated, we didn't talk about this in this episode, maybe we covered it in the last time I was on, but I'm someone who became psychic very rapidly, very quickly, and I started communicating with different beings of all sorts, angels, what we would call aliens, all sorts of different stuff. I've done a bunch of psychedelics, and I've seen a bunch of different things. My clouds, a lot of stuff comes to me in the clouds, just weird stuff. So I would communicate with these beings, and I could free people. I could free these energies by having them take on Christ as their Lord and Savior, and then they would just be gone from this place. They would no longer be here. They were earthbound only because this is like purgatory, the other side of physicality that exist all around us, that we don't know exists all around us, the unseen realm. They are around us because they're in purgatory and they don't know it, and they start messing with us, and they're doing all sorts of different stuff because they're trying to have fun, because they just want to have experience again, because they don't experience anything. And when we talk about psychics and mediums that tap into those energies, they think that they're talking to people in heaven because those people are dead, and they think that automatically you either go to heaven or hell, but that's not what it is. You go to Abraham's bosom, and there's two sides to it, and you can either be waiting to go to heaven, or you can be waiting to go to hell, but it's still purgatory, and they have to essentially gain their wings. These angels have to earn their wings, if you will. So that's kind of what ghosts are, earthbound spirits, as I would call them, that they're unclean. Maybe the Bible will call them unclean spirits, that they haven't earned their way into heaven yet. And then when we talk about spirits, there's different like elemental energies that like when we talk about the Watchers and the book of Enoch, the stars are the Watchers. They were created to watch the earth. And they are their own beings. We would call them like elementals maybe, but there's still fallen angels. So these spirits, like the grass is a living thing. It has its own spirit. The water is its own living thing. It has a spirit. Not the same as humanity. Like, we can do more things with our physical body than they can. You know, there's only a certain degree of things that these plants and elementals can do, but they are still spirits who can move about. They can speak to you. You know, you can hear the wind speak to you if you listen closely enough, as the Native Americans would say. There's a lot of different things like that. And at any time, because they are sentient beings, just like we are, they can either be working for God or they can be working against God. And they can tell you all sorts of different things. And you really don't know what you can trust once you start realizing that there are things that have their own agendas, and God gives everything its own free will. So he allows them to freely trick us. If we want to be tricked, then we'll just fall right into it. So I think that would probably sum up the three different spirits, ghosts, and demons that you asked me about.
Excellent. Yeah. So we have our Millennial Kingdom from around starting kind of in the 70s, but then not really taking effect till around 600, 700.
Yeah, like 500, I would say.
Yeah. And then it goes all the way up until this Carrington event in the 1800s, which kind of resets everything again. Now, what's supposed to happen is Satan supposed to come up?
Okay, so the years again are a little fuzzy. So I think that 500 to 1500 is called the Dark Ages, and I think that's the Millennial Kingdom would have been that 1,000 years. But why would that have been the Dark Ages? Wouldn't that have been like Enlightenment ages? Well, say everything in here is inverse, right? They inverse everything. So what do they call after the Dark Ages is the Enlightenment era? Yeah, it's Renaissance. Right. So the reason why they call it the Dark Ages is because the lack of scientific advancement is what they say. But there was actually a 300-year warming period where the whole Earth warmed up and it became much warmer everywhere. They didn't necessarily have the same seasons that we have. It was a more warm place. Like, this is mainstream history. It says 300 years. But when so how would it be the Dark Ages if it was actually a better temperatures all around? Because they say it's lack of scientific advancement. Well, science is the religion of the Luciferians. And I mean, people can talk about scientism today. It's quite obvious what's been happening in the last couple of years, that these people just fall into the belief that science is real, but it's actually a religion. It's a tradition that people just believe everything that's said about that. And the Enlightenment is who brings enlightenment, right? It's Lucifer brings enlightenment. So not Jesus? No, we're like the Enlightenment era would. So the Dark Ages end because the science then starts to advance again. So they're always talking in the Bible, and any Christian will tell you that the one who brings enlightenment is the bringer of knowledge, the bringer of light is Lucifer, right? So Jesus isn't the enlightener. Jesus is the savior of humanity. It's what he brings is an understanding, yes, and you could say he enlightens you to what you truly are and how you can truly leave this place, but he is not bringing you the information in the same way. He is here to defeat evil. He is here to bring the sinners back to redemption, and that's what he was here for. It wasn't to enlighten people, it was to free them from sin. Yeah. And sin of course means to miss the mark. And to miss the mark of what? To miss the mark of perfection, which means we're not being judged for doing things badly. We are sinning by not being the best versions of ourselves, by participating in things that are hurting ourselves, and most of the time we don't even know it.
So the end is the Carrington event. What happens after the Carrington event?
So this is where it gets a little fuzzy for me. Honestly, I don't have all the answers, and this is something that's going to take a lot more research to really dive into. But when you look at, so we talked about France earlier with Napoleon, right? Napoleon is his name, it has a little word magic in it.
Napoleon.
Yeah, Napoleon.
Napoleon. There you go.
Yeah, N Apollyon. His name, a little word magic. It's N Apollyon. But when I'm bringing up France again for a reason, because Baphomet is a character. It's a French word that actually means the baptism of enlightenment or baptism of wisdom. And he looks a lot like Krampus, Krampus in Germany and Austria. He is bound in chains, and he comes and beats the non-believers. And he's with Saint Nick. There's also the Statue of Liberty comes from France, and it's actually the creators of it used the molding of Mithras, a statue of Mithras, to represent the Statue of Liberty, which looks a lot like paintings of Lucifer, and it's holding the light, it also has broken chains around its ankle. There's a lot of different weird things with the Statue of Liberty, and with France involved in all of this different stuff. And even like Baphomet is actually like the French word extending from Mamet or Muhammad. Mamet, the god of money, Muhammad, the prophet of Islam. I'm not here bashing Islam or anything. That's just what it comes from. That's like literally, that's the information that I found.
I associate Lucifer with the moon and money and Mooney. And so it all kind of connects for me. And then liberty, you could see liberty as being like Luberty, which would put that Lu in there, which would have that moon connotation.
That extends from Columbia, right? That's also, they're the same deity or similar.
The LU is right in the middle of Columbia.
Yeah, and Columbus, then you go to the Chicago Exposition, 1892, 400 years after Christopher Columbus discovered America, and it has a big old statue of Columbia. You have Columbia Pictures, Columbia Records, Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia. It's so many different word magic things going on there.
Yeah, it's like deity worship of the pagans, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Of female deities. I mean, that's pretty much why the Templar were eradicated by the Catholic churches, because that they were worshiping a female deity.
Well, I don't even know that they're necessarily female, because you look at the Statue of Liberty, it looks like a man.
Androgyny is like the big thing. So you know what I mean. That's what Baphomet is too. So
right, the trans movement, and they call it transhumanism.
And maybe that could even connect into the Ophiuchus zodiac symbol, because he has 1 foot on land and 1 foot in water, so he has that duality within. So it's kind of almost like a Baphomet type of being androgynous, male and female, being water and land. It's kind of similar in that respect. And I think the Statue of Liberty has like 1 foot in water, 1 foot on land too. Yeah.
Well, it's something, it's just like a symbolic thing. It's actually just on top of a pillar, but it's on an island. So that's like the seventh angel of the seven angels who would sound the trumpets. I mean, it's depicted, the Statue of Liberty is exactly depicting what is talked about the seventh angel. So I didn't know if Ophiuchus had 1 foot on water and 1 foot on land. That's interesting as well.
Interesting, huh? Yeah, it pertains to those types of things too. And Ophiuchus is that one between, I think he's between Scorpio and I can't remember.
Sagittarius.
Is it Sag?
Yeah, because I'm a Sagittarius, but with Ophiuchus, now I'm an Ophiuchus. And it's only like like 2 weeks long, and it's
Yeah,
my birthday
sure.
is in there. So
Yeah. Interesting. So let's see. So okay, so one of the things that I wanted to talk about was you say you take everything from the Bible literally, and that's how you're able to get these explanations. In Mark 4:33-41, he says, with many similar parables, Jesus spoke to the word to them as much as they could understand. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. But when he was alone with his own disciples, he explained everything. So it seems to me like he was saying these things in parables to the people, but then in like close proximity, it's kind of like a mystery school type thing. He was able to explain the meaning behind what he was actually saying. What do you think about for people that would say that Jesus only speaks in parables and not literal, not to take the Bible literally, but as a parable for what's going on?
So when he does speak in parable, it does specifically say speaking in parable. And like you said there, I was saying that he said would occur at the end of the world, quote unquote, at the end of the world. All those things he was saying specifically to his disciples right before he was about to be murdered. So it was behind closed doors. So it wasn't that he was out in the open. So what it's saying in Mark is that when he went out into the public and he was in the public square, in order to get people to think about things, he would say them in parable so that those who had a mind to understand would then think about it and understand it. Because if you go around shouting stuff like the government's evil and they're here, they created a fake pandemic in order to deceive you, people are like, oh, I'm not listening to that guy. But if you start to speak in parable, then they'll start to think about it. And those who don't have the capacity to think about it, you don't need to reach them. So you kind of filter out people in that way, that people who are interested in what you're saying and they're intrigued by you, they're going to follow you. But when you're very direct about things, it's going to lead to more conflict rather than to get people to question everything. They're not going to want to follow you if they see you causing so much conflict. So I will say that the Bible is very metaphorical for your own life, and you can use it as for your own very personal understanding of everything. There is that aspect to it. There is partially astrotheology, it's partially numerology, it's partially many different things, but it is these authors were writing these things literally because it was a literal thing that was going on. It was important enough to write it down. So I don't just take the Bible as literal, but when I look at the Greek mythology, Roman mythologies, Egyptians, all of these different things, I take them all as literal. And when I first started, I would pick and choose what I would consider literal and what I would consider metaphorical. And I went to the Bible as the last thing that I started reading. Like I said, I'm in the Old Testament now. I read through the New Testament and now I'm in the Old Testament, but I haven't read it fully, the Old Testament, yet. And I've read the New Testament before, but it means more to me now once I understood or once I started looking into all these different aspects. And when I started, I was taking things as metaphorical. I've had people on like Ed Dodge who said, Columbia and Liberty are ISIS. They're the same character. They're just different names in different places. Like, yeah, there is that. So when I was trying to understand everything that was going on, I was like, okay, these are the same things, but then sometimes they're not the same thing. Like sometimes Thoth and Mercury line up very well together, but then there's other times where they don't line up at all. And sometimes the Enoch, the son of Cain, lines up with certain aspects of Azazel, the fallen angel, but also there's other times where he's lining up with Thoth in certain things, but they don't always line up. So to me, when I see that there's similarities between them, but I look around and I'm like, yeah, well, there's similarities between Dan and I, but there's also differences between us. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't exist differently, and that doesn't mean that if someone's writing the story, someone's watching the both of us and writing each story in different ways, that they would be saying, oh, no, that's just the same character. So when we're hundreds or even thousands of years down the line, it's important that we do give everyone and everything that's written down its full respect and take it as literal, if that's what the author is meaning it as. But a lot of times these ancient works, they aren't written down as metaphorical things to be a mystery school thing. Now, it can work that way, and it does often work that way in many different things, but it is the literal that should be understood first. Well, maybe not first even, but it should be understood at some point that it's not just metaphorical, symbolic, and all these other things, as above, so below, fractal nature. It is all of those things, but it is also literal. Like if we wrote down, what happened with politics and the pandemic in the last couple of years, like in 100 years, some of it's so ridiculous that if someone picked up in 100 years, like, oh, that can't be real. That's just metaphor. That wasn't really happening. That was just because, there's still events to come that someone would be like, oh, they just, obviously the pandemic was just some kind of cover to try to take over the world. And when those people were taken out, there was this world war that was occurring, but none of it was real. It was just metaphorical for the changes that were going on in the world, which, yeah, it is metaphorical for the changes going on in the world, but it's also very literal as well. So we have to have we have to treat everything equally, whether it's symbolic. You can't pick and choose that you want this to be symbolic, but you want this to be literal. You have to read it all symbolically, then read it all literally, and then you'll have a much better understanding rather than pick and choosing which box you want to, or column you want to pull from.
All right. So many people may assume that I'm pagan of some sort or whatnot. But personally, actually, I don't worship any deities. I talk a lot about paganism, and I also talk about biblical stuff a lot too. And for me, I don't worship any deities because I feel like they're all bad. They all come from the same place, in my opinion. And that goes along with Jesus too. I don't see a differentiation between him and the other gods. They're all the gods, and all the gods are part of the same families. Therefore, he's part of that same family. And so because I hear this a lot, that all these pagan gods are evil and Jesus is not evil and he's separated. What is that distinction and separation that makes them different? Like, how are they not all connected?
Okay, so when we look at what is the similarities between them, there are not very many. So when we talk about these birth dates of December 25th, firstly, we know that the man Yeshua, he was not born December 25th, but right. Mary was probably conceived with the Holy Spirit on December 25th, and he was probably born what we know as September 11th. And that is a whole nother tangent you could go on, but they didn't have December 25th when Nimrod was around, when Osiris was around. That wasn't such a thing. That is something that modern people have put on Mithras. That wasn't a thing back then. December 25th, that is, it's completely false doctrine that people teach. And they just, like Jordan Maxwell, rest in peace to him, but they just continue to spit out these pieces of information that they heard somewhere else at one point, but that's not actually verifiable. There's nothing true about, there was no December 25th. So when people say that these deities were born December 25th, like, just look at when creation or calendars were created, and there was no such time period.
To counter that, I would say, aren't they just getting this symbology from the fact that the sun dips on that
Right.
day, and it's a sun religion, sun worship. So they
could be doing that. Yeah.
They're just putting into the fact that, because I've heard before, like through the zeitgeist type shit, that Jesus died for 3 days and then came back. It's just a representation of the sun dying for 3 days and coming back, because it's the winter solstice. So it's like the 3 lesser days, and then the sunlight increases after that. So couldn't it just be that kind of dating through astronomical dating rather than putting a December 25th stamp on it?
Well, yeah, that could be certainly a part of it. And as above, so below is a real thing. It's the fractal nature of life.
Right, yeah. And I'm with you there.
Yeah, and the sun dying and hanging, that is kind of symbolic in the sense that that's what happened with Jesus, right? But Jesus is actually the only one who defeated death and returned to earth, and returned so much that Paul wrote half of the New Testament, someone who was persecuting Christians. He was actually blinded on the road to Damascus by Jesus Christ in spirit after he was crucified, came to him, blinded him because he came to him, and he was so bright that he blinded him, the same way that Moses had to hide his face when he encountered Yahweh because his face was so bright that he blinded people, so he had to shield his face. That is what happened. So Paul's teachings are very important. And then Paul goes to this man when he gets to Damascus, this man who also was in touch with Jesus Christ, the energetic being that he is, and knew that Paul was coming and that he would heal him. And that's exactly what happened. These people didn't have any touch whatsoever. They knew because of the invisible God came to them. So that's what Jesus is, the invisible God made visible. And I actually did a little excerpt on my YouTube channel about this yesterday, a little hour discussion about the invisible God being made visible. So the characteristics of God, even the disciples, they were confused by what Jesus was saying all the time when he says, the Father sent me. If you believe in me, you believe in he who sent me. And his disciples would say things like, well, can you show us what the Father is? Because he would also say, no one has seen the Father except the Son. And he's saying, I'm the Son of God, which actually, in those days, calling yourself the son of someone meant you're equal to. So he's saying, I am God, when he's saying, I am the Son of God. And so they're saying, well, what does the Father look like? And he's just like, my actions. That's what the Father looks like. God is invisible. The invisible God made visible is Jesus. By him showing us what he was doing was he was going around and he was correcting the incorrect actions. People were, the worst things they had to say about him was that he was going against man's tradition of observing the Sabbath, which is a man-made thing, and he was healing people on the Sabbath. That was the worst thing that was said about him. But what the loving God would do is he would heal you on any day of the week, and it didn't matter. So he was correcting people when they were incorrect. He was showing compassion and care for those who were being cast out by men everywhere. He came to redeem the sinners, that the people that were cast out are castaways, the tax collectors, the prostitutes, the lepers, all the people that society deemed unworthy. That's who the loving, invisible God made visible came to reach and connect with. And he came to show that those who are teaching you things, these are the Pharisees. This is the synagogue of Satan. This is the line of old vipers that come from Cain. That
the Pharisees are?
Yes, and he says that specifically 2 different times, that they're the line of vipers, that they're not from Abraham, and that they are from the line of Cain, which
are the Pharisees the Jesuits?
I get, well, to me, it could be like these Christian pastors, and also whatever religion you want to talk about, that are there to deceive people, purposely to deceive people. I think that's what the Pharisees, that's what it means to me. And so to me, Adam and Eve, when Eve ate of the fruit, the forbidden fruit, she actually had sex with one of these serpent angels, these seraphim, and produced a child, which was Cain, which is why Jesus said the line of vipers from Cain, who killed the righteous Abel. So that's where I really think that all extends from. But so Jesus himself, he sacrificed himself. He took this torture, and it's very symbolic. The torture and beatings that he took are symbolic of these religious leaders and these political leaders torturing God and killing God so that they then became God and that they were then worshipped and they could rule over humanity without God intervening. They didn't want God in their mind and their moral ways telling them that they're doing wrong. So they killed God. God came to love us and came to show us the way to heaven, because we had these rulers that were over us, the Pharisees, that were teaching us false ways of living. And they wanted us to live by tradition, which is we call religion. You know, I wash my clothes religiously. I play softball religiously. You know, you do things on a tradition basis, and they call it religion. But he wanted to buck the tradition, and for that, they ultimately killed him, because he was showing all of these subjects who were subjected to the Pharisees' rule. He was showing them that they didn't need other men to listen to, that they had the invisible God within them, that they could get in touch with their morality if they aligned with what God wanted them to do by not doing the things that they had a guilty conscience of. You know, when you do something, you feel guilt, shame, fear. That is not from God. So that means that you shouldn't be doing those things. So you repent by not doing those things, by apologizing to God or whoever that you did an act to, and that you don't do those things anymore. That's what repenting means, is acknowledging your past mistakes and not doing them anymore. So why Jesus is different is because Jesus shows that God is all loving and kind and compassionate, whereas the other ones wanted worship. Jesus didn't want to be worshipped. What he was doing was he was washing the feet of his disciples. And when he goes to wash their feet, he was being a servant to humanity. Even though he is the creator, all of the creator's best attributes, because there's nothing bad ever said about Jesus anywhere you look into Yeshua. There's nothing bad ever said about the man, except for he was healing people on the Sabbath. That was the worst thing that they had against him. So
I mean, he liked hookers.
Yeah, and then he hung out with the hookers and tax collectors.
Just a joke.
Yeah, but that is like, that's the worst things that are said about him. But that's because these people were threatened, because what he said was, if you had a flock of sheep and your sheep is hurt on the Sabbath, are you not going to help it up? Or are you just going to leave it in a ditch just because it's the Sabbath? Well, humanity is his sheep, because he is the shepherd of us, and he is here to bring us, or was here to bring us all back to the Creator. So why he is different is he shows what servitude actually
inherently
is.
Good.
Yes, inherently good. What servitude is, how to act. So he's not being worshipped. He's not up on a throne, up on a mantle. There's supposed to be no images of him being created. He's not, being fed grapes and being fanned. He's riding in on a donkey. He's being tortured. This is what humanity has done to God. If you want to look at it symbolically, that is the life of Jesus. And that is why Jesus is God in the flesh, the invisible God made visible. He had all the characteristics of God and all the symbolic nature of what was happening to God throughout all of history was summarized in his lifetime and what happened. And it's, there's mystery about 13 to 29. Where was he? Did he go to India? Did he learn Buddhism? That type of stuff, which I'm sure he actually did learn the human body in that way. And was learning amongst quote unquote yogis or whatever that there were at the time in order to learn those different techniques that they were doing. So he had a better understanding of how to reach people and how to teach them what he needed to teach. But he was significantly different in that he defeated death on the cross. He went down to hell and he brought out all of those that were down in hell, all these spirits that were down in hell. He freed them and he brought them to a new understanding, and he created a new way to heaven so that we didn't have to have violence to fight over, because this is what was happening for a long time before him, was that people were fighting over God, and that they still do, and that they were saying that, you had to rule over someone in order to make them rule by fear, rule by violence, that you had to make them believe your way of doing things. And that's not how he ruled at all. His kingdom was not of this earth, because if it was, then all of his subjects would have fought to the death for him when he was taken by the Pharisees in the middle of the night. But they didn't, because his kingdom wasn't of here. And that's what makes him different. That these other entities that you're talking about, they made their kingdoms here, and they were worshipped in Norse mythology, Egypt, Greek, Rome, Babylon, wherever. They were worshipped physically, and they had statues made to them, and sacrifice was given to them. They literally killed people in order to appease the gods, whereas Jesus asked you to let him live through you so that you may live eternally. Because if you change and renew your mindset enough to where you're no longer abiding by the egotistical sense of physical carnal nature, you are then able to eternally live, because you never die. Because once you leave the physical body, you can just go to the heavenly state, because you've been living in a heavenly state within yourself while you've been on this earthly plane. So it's very different. Whereas they are teaching enlightening and how to have a better life now, like astrologers will teach you to avoid certain things in certain months, because Mercury retrograde's coming and that's going to happen. Whereas Jesus is saying, overcome your shortcomings. Don't avoid them. Don't pretend they don't exist. No, look them head on and face them and become better by acknowledging your wrongdoing and to not continue doing those wrong things.
Excellent. I have a couple more questions for you. One is, was Jesus in physical form when he was in America, or is it after the fact, or was the kingdom set up by Jesus to come into America, and for what reason, really?
So I don't know if it was actually America that. So again, we don't know where Jerusalem was at the time where Jesus is actually from. Could have been America. Could be Russia, like I said earlier. Could have been anywhere, really. So the one world type of Millennial Kingdom, it would have been everywhere. It wouldn't have been just America.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know if he was physically here. That's the thing so you got preterists believe that, for the most part, they believe that the Millennial Kingdom is currently going on and has been going on since Jesus died, and that he's been ruling from a heavenly throne, which I believe to a degree there's a point with that, but I don't believe we're in the millennial reign now. Like I said, I believe that the adversary, if you take they live as some kind of historical thing, that there's another species living amongst us that look and appear to be us but aren't. And if all of a sudden we just had that veil lifted where we could see what they were, well, then that could explain the Christian Crusades and those types of events where people were killing in the name of Christ, killing these demonic beings that were pretending to be human. And if all of those adversaries were then all these rulers that are causing war and famine right now, really manipulating war and famine and pestilence on the earth right now in this time. I mean, it's really hectic at the moment, but so if they were all bound up and humanity was left to its own devices, that would be Christ reigning over earth physically to me, because we are all the body of Christ. So as long as the adversary isn't here, then we wouldn't be deceived into doing these hurtful things.
So the evil in the world is due to the fact that the Millennial Kingdom is over and the demons are here.
Yeah, so I think that it's the adversary, is misleading people, and we have the capacity to be both good and evil because we are the offspring of the fallen and humanity. Like we possess all these different potentials.
So are we in Revelation now, or is this whole reset thing like a fake apocalypse?
So it's a fake apocalypse, but it is the end of Revelation. So it's like Revelation 20 talks about that's when Satan will be loosed from the pit. So it is a fake apocalypse, but it brings on the great white throne judgment. It's the final pieces of it. And I think that's what Agenda 2030 is kind of leading towards, that that may be the splitting point of transhumanism versus New Jerusalem, new heaven on earth. I think that's the dividing point.
So do you think there is awakening happening or no?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's God's calling back all of his creation. I mean, my life is very symbolic of many different things. I mean, I've been through a lot, but I've really changed myself in so many ways. And when I communicate with people, doing this podcast, so many different people have so many similar stories of changing their life, reforming themselves, speaking their truth, and having so many different things happening and changing them in a way that when I read Paul's writings in the New Testament, I'm like, yeah, that's what's happening to me. And that's what was happening back then to Paul's. And I see that happening on a large scale around the world at this time. So I think God is really calling to his children, which we are all his children, and those who are believing and trusting in men, they are being misled, and they are wearing masks and getting things injected into their bodies, and they are saying that others are stupid and bad for not listening to men, but those who are listening to God within them are like, well, I don't necessarily need any of that stuff because God created me perfectly to be able to handle things. And that's exactly what we're designed to do. And that's exactly what our bodies do for us. So there is this point of, do I trust myself, which is the Christ within you, or do I trust others who are telling me this information that I can't actually verify that is called science?
Very good. So we got about 10 minutes left. I want to try to slide this last one in real quick. And because I battle back and forth with this one too, and that is Egypt and America. Are they parallel? Or did they exist at the same time? Did one beget the other? Is there beget, then beget, then beget again? Is there three different times where it went back and forth, or how do you feel about that? What's your opinion?
Well, there's a lot of weird stuff with this. So I think that that America, North and South America, were the origins, and that it was then copied to a sense, in the fractal nature. It started off the spiral point, the centralized point would have been somewhere in America, and then it would have spiraled off. And when you get back around to the same spot on the spiral, it's the same thing happening on a larger scale. So that Europe, as we know, the old world, I think that's the copied world, Europe, Middle East, Asia, that's the copy of North and South America. And then North and South America were destroyed in the 1800s, or before that in the 1500s, whenever it really, because when I do want to say that when we talk about the 1800s being the destruction, I think that there was something that happened prior to that happened in like the 1500s, where there was a larger sun, or maybe 1600, somewhere around there, that there was a larger sun going around the outer ring, and that it exploded to some degree. And there's a lot of weird stuff that goes on with that. That's called the sevenfold sun, which is also biblical prophecy. And there's also a sighting of the sevenfold sun in 1661. And there's also crop circles that depict a sevenfold sun. A lot of weird stuff with that. But anyway, so I think that there was some kind of destruction in the Americas that killed off the giants, that somehow oxygen really left this place. And with that, maybe it was burned up, maybe it just escaped when the firmament was opened, whatever it actually was. All the larger things died off. And that's when we had the Europeans start coming around. That's when the Enlightenment era begins. That's when the Europeans start traveling all over the place. And that's when we bring the quote unquote new world. But it's the new world, I think, is built on top of the old world, that it's not like when we talk about New London, I think it's probably built on top of the original London. All these different things. New York is built on top of old York. And what we have in Europe was a copy of the original, which was here, that for whatever reason they had to leave here, go back over there, and then they came back over here once it was safe to do so. So I think that there's, like you said, there's multiple, like moving from here to there to back. And now they're telling us when they move back that we're copying names from where we moved from. But that was already a copy of what was once here. And then they just built on top of these things here.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think America, North and South America, were Atlantis. Then after the fall of Atlantis, they moved into Egypt and the Middle East, and then since have come back and refound America again. And it was back and forth like that. And that's kind of where we get these different ideas, and maybe even the parallels. Maybe they both existed for a short time at the same period, because there was a migration process happening from this continent to the other continents.
Yeah, so, completely agree.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, let's wrap it up here. And thank you so much for joining me today, Immanuel. I appreciate your time. And this is always a fun conversation. Tell the good people where they can find you at and what you got going on, man.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a while since you and I have gotten together, so I enjoy it. Yeah. And shout out to Romy. Hope that you're all better, my friend. Yeah. You can all find me at Godcast, the Goodness Over Darkness podcast. Its audio is on any audio platform. On YouTube, I have Goodness Over Darkness. You can find my 8-part series of Christ's Millennial Kingdom on there. You can find the 2-part series of the Biblical Apocalypse on there. You can find a 3-part series on the Book of Enoch on there. They all have their own playlist, as well as the video versions of all my podcast episodes are on there. And I do different things like the Human Race series, which is a once a month kind of roundtable discussion. As Andy Rouse and I, we also have Worship in the Storm. We haven't done that in a little while, and it'll probably still be a little bit more until we're able to get that up again, but they're all on there as well. So there's a lot of good stuff on there. And my website, ImmanuelKingman.com. That's IMMANUEL Kingman.com. And you can find a lot of good stuff on there as well.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate your time. It was a great conversation. And for the Fire Tribe out there, wake the fuck up.
Just looking for dances behind lost time. Lost time. Everything exists within our atmosphere, then the memory remains. The memories remain. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. Therefore, the past is there to be discovered. To discover who we truly are. Because we're just looking for answers to see if this is all just a simulation. And I'm not sure anymore. Life does just seem to be a blur anymore. Will we rise from the ashes?